glad to see everybody here today. Today we have a very rare privilege. We have an English-speaking guest speaker. So, international community, please welcome our guest, Mr. Ben Nelson. He's come to share with us a topic that I think that is something that all of us are thinking about: how to study to secure competitiveness in the AI era. He is completely qualified to talk about this. Not only did I have the privilege of hearing him speak earlier, but I was challenged by some of the things that he said, and I hope that that is going to be the case for you as well. Mr. Ben Nelson is the founder, chairman, and CEO of Minerva University. Minerva is a different kind of educational system. It's been developed to nurture critical wisdom for the sake of the world through a systematic and evidence-based approach to learning. Mr. Nelson has a vision and a passion to reinvent higher education. And his university in 2023 was classified as the most innovative university in the world. It is truly a rare privilege to get to hear him speak. Not only is he going to share his wisdom from prepared remarks, but at the end, he's going to open for questions from you. So I challenge you, listen, think about what he has to say, and if you want more information, be prepared to ask. Okay? Mr. Nelson, please join us. Thank you.
Thank you. The topic of the day, AI, is going to be a topic with us for a long, long time. And I wanted to talk to you about what it means for you, because AI has both been overpromised and dismissed, has caused a lot of fear, and has caused a lot of excitement. But I think somewhere in between, there are things that have always been true, that will continue to be true, and then there are a lot of things that we have assumed to be true, which I believe will not be. And so let's unpack what AI means, and then how does that matter to what you do now as students. So, first, let's talk a little bit about what the AI as we know it is. Does everybody here, or does anybody here, know what an LLM is, a large language model? Have you heard that term? Yes? At least one person? Anybody else? Okay, let me explain a little bit. Artificial intelligence is not a thing. It is a basket of things, and there are different theories and models that generate what is an artificial intelligence. What it basically means in artificial intelligence is that when a machine can perform a task that we had otherwise before assumed required a higher order intelligence, a human level intelligence. So it goes beyond computation, it goes beyond interpolation, and it gets to interpretation. Now, there are all sorts of methodologies to get to an artificial intelligence. The most broadly deployed artificial intelligence model, which isn't really an AI, but it's related, is a machine learning model. What does a machine learning model do? What does it mean? A machine learning model looks at enormous amounts of data and then examines what happens from that data and does something, creates algorithms that predict similar types of patterns from occurring or future patterns. Machine learning artificial intelligence has been very broadly deployed over a long period of time, most potently over the last 10, 15 years in social media. And it's these machine learning, artificial intelligence like algorithms that determine what it is that you see on your social media feeds. They look at your behavior, what you have clicked through, how you respond, and what you react to, and then it uses enormous amounts of data to feed you things that you are more likely to engage on, not just in the short run, but in the long run. Now, though it had significant societal implications, that kind of machine learning wasn't particularly threatening to jobs. Why? Because before, you didn't really have fleets of hundreds of people sitting around spreadsheets trying to take enormous amounts of data and compiling them and getting intelligence. It really opened up new kinds of opportunities, which frankly just created much more jobs than it destroyed. So our first encounter with artificial intelligence en masse was actually, from a jobs perspective, a relatively positive one. From a societal perspective, it was disastrous, but that's a different problem, right? Which is why, in many ways, when this second approach, this large language model approach, which is what ChatGPT is based on, why when that came out a year and a half ago into the public consciousness, why it caused such a profound ripple effect, a profound shock. Because that kind of AI wasn't about a machine learning approach. It wasn't about taking a data set, specific, finite, training an algorithm, and then optimizing it. It was instead a process by which the AI was fed an enormous amount of unstructured information, large amount of language, human-generated language, and the AI was trained to make sense of it. And so it could take this giant amount of information and produce work in very, very fast periods of time, much faster than human beings can, that resembled works of humans. This caused the most shock when it came to the college essay. Because for years, so we say, self-assured university presidents were looking at all the advances in technology and laughing to themselves and saying, ah, ha, ha, these coders are going to be worked out of a job. These people who are doing data analysis, the machine will take that over. But boy, when I assign my students the ability to have Hannah Arendt have a conversation with Marcel Proust about some random topic, there's no way that a machine can generate that. Well, guess what the AI could do instantly? And much better than most students, exactly that. And that was an earth-shaking moment for academia. Because all of a sudden, the entire premise, sure, you know, you don't really need to know what all the components of the Krebs cycle is. But, you know, we'll test you on it anyway. And sure, we don't expect you to, you know, do calculus without the aid of a machine. But we'll test you on that also. But boy, the real value add is the stuff that you can't have the machine do. So we're going to make sure to assess you on those things, on the essays and the deep thinking. And guess what? When you look at a large language model, there's an enormous amount of information there. And because the machine was able to get to process that information, not quite understand it, but process it effectively and analyze it, it was able to create completely coherent information based on that training set and create a lot of original, effective work in that way. And so that created a bit of an earthquake, and a lot of attention was drawn to that aspect. Now, that aspect matters a great deal to you, but perhaps not in the way that you think it does. So I'm going to park that to the side, and now we're going to go to a completely different topic. Now, in Silicon Valley, where I have lived for the past quarter of a century and worked, there is a mythical creature that roams the streets. That mythical creature is known as the 10X engineer. Has anybody ever heard the term, the 10X engineer? So if you're not familiar with the term, that creature is as is described. It is an engineer who is able to produce the work of 10 other engineers on his own or her own. The creature is actually not quite that mythical. They do exist. I have known several. I've hired a couple of them in my career. And they are truly remarkable. They do produce the work, maybe not of 10, but of multiple good engineers, 5, 6, 7, 8. And they cost a fortune, but they are worth every penny. The productivity that they produce is profound, and not just in how quickly they can produce, much more importantly, in the quality of their code. Their ability to architect and create code that does not generate bugs later is amazing to behold. In fact, the best 10X engineers that I have met spend vastly more time thinking about a problem than coding it. They think through it deeply, they sketch out solutions, they think about unintended consequences, about second and third order effects, about how it would interact with other elements of the code base. They iterate on that idea, and then when they have an elegant solution in their mind, they produce. And they produce at lightning rates. And the most remarkable 10X engineer I've ever met would go through that process, and if you know anything about engineering, his code would compile at first writing, and he would do no revisions in it. That is extraordinary. And he had a mind which was amazing. Now, 2 years ago, actually 2 years ago and a month, so just a little over 2 years ago, I was at a conference and I went for a walk with Sam Altman, who's the president of OpenAI. And we were just catching up, seeing how things were going. I'd known Sam from well before he was at OpenAI. And I was asking him, well, how are things going? How's it looking? And he said, boy, this thing is surprising me every day. And he told me then that ChatGPT, now remember, this is April of 2022. So this is a good 6 months before the release of ChatGPT to the general public. And he told me that at that point, on GPT 3.5 beta, 70% of the work that his coders were doing was done for them by ChatGPT. Back then. 70%. Now granted, that may not be the highest value 70%, but it's not just the lowest value. And so I quickly kind of was going through my mind and said, my God, so even if you're assuming that it's not a 1-to-1 ratio, already every one of your engineers is at minimum a 2x engineer. Now, in Silicon Valley, over the years, you had a bunch of these accelerating functions at play. When I first came to Silicon Valley and we were building things like shopping carts, it would take a team of 4 or 5 engineers 6 months to build a shopping cart. Today, you can build it overnight. You don't build it, you just take a library and deploy it. Right? So stuff that was off the shelf enabled people to do things much, much faster. This was different. This wasn't just reproducing things that are making you more efficient. This is actually creating novel code, new solutions to problems that make the thinking process of the engineer more efficient. And of course, that is going to accelerate with time. Now, if that were the extent of the effect of ChatGPT, then we could look at it and say, great. Eventually, you will have 3x, 4x, 5x, eventually 10x engineers so that everybody can produce more. And because every engineering team and every company in the world is backlogged and has a 10-year roadmap, fantastic, we'll be able to produce more technology and the tide will lift all boats and this is all going to be wonderful because we've been on this path of reducing that scope even more so. But that's not necessarily where the story will end. And that's because we don't really know yet what happens when the 10x engineers then use an agent like ChatGPT. We don't know what ChatGPT, call it 6, is going to do to enable those individuals not just to think of an architect, but to deploy entire systems in a blink of an eye. What's more, ChatGPT wasn't trained on just coding information. It was trained on a generic large language model. And it can be trained on anything it is fed. So what happens when all of a sudden there aren't just 10x engineers, but 10x lawyers, 10x architects, 10x doctors, 10x civil servants? What happens when people who know how to deploy and use these tools become vastly, vastly more productive than the people who don't? Let me give you some hypotheses. I'm sure you've come across this phenomenon where you may even know a person who, let's just say, isn't particularly smart, maybe kind of lazy, but his mommy or daddy are really well connected. And somehow, this person winds up in a really good job. And, you know, they don't do a very good job, but mommy and daddy are happy, and the person who hired him wants to make mommy and daddy happy, and that's fine. Now, in today's world, when the 10x producer is either mythical or non-existent in most fields, having that cost of a person is not such a big deal. Right? Maybe they're 20 or 30% less productive than an average worker. Maybe every once in a while they screw things up and they have to be cleaned up, but everybody makes mistakes. They just do it more often. And businesses deal with that. But now imagine that a business has to make a decision on how to deploy resources. One person can produce the work not 20 or 30% better than this person, but 15 times better. They're producing 10 times the work of a good worker, let alone one that isn't good. Who's going to hire that kid? Who's going to say, oh yeah, I'm going to have a competitive company, right, by giving Joe Moron there an opportunity? That's not going to happen. What happens when people are going to be able to demonstrate to their employers that their ability to use these tools not only make them more productive, but are able to get them to create a quality of work product which is vastly better than what can be done today. Not because they're able to spit out, for example, in a legal case, contract after contract, but actually to have a novel idea behind a way to structure indemnification language that is acceptable to various parties, but saves the company potentially millions of dollars. And what if they can demonstrate that before their first day of work? Think about the bar that can be set if these technologies continue to develop. Now, what does all of this have to do with the pre-written essay by ChatGPT at schools? Well, quite a bit. A large language model has one core flaw. It cannot think. It is actually not an artificial intelligence if we were to look at the name and what it suggests. It is an artificial intelligence mimicker. It mimics intelligence. It itself is not discerning. And to be discerning is one of the hardest things that a human being can train themselves to be. The only way to learn discernment, the only way to understand how to evaluate work that is going to come at you at record-breaking speeds is to train yourself to do it. It is not to ignore the technology, but it also isn't to use it as a substitute. It is worse. It is to make your life harder by leveraging the technology and ingesting all of the work that it can provide to train yourselves over and over and over again on being able to discern when it suggests things that make sense versus when they don't, when it effectively compiles something versus when it hallucinates and provides you incorrect information. It gives you the ability to understand intuitively when it says something that doesn't feel right, and for you to be able to go back and interrogate as to why or why not it does or does not make sense. These are the kinds of tools that you have the luxury now as students to take the time and develop. And these types of skills, these types of capacities won't be rewarded in the short run. You will have to spend more time for incrementally marginal benefit. Because the work product that ChatGPT does with a cursory glance to make sure there are no glaring falsehoods or hallucinations will get you, in most classes, the A that you want. Maybe an A- or a B+. But the point for you shouldn't be the grade. It should be your livelihood. Because I guarantee you that there are millions of students around the world who see this as their ticket. And they are going to be gunning for the same types of opportunities you will. And most importantly, the students that are going to come after you who will be using ChatGPT 5 and 6 and 7 for their day-to-day are going to be at a huge advantage. Now, there's going to be another paradigm shift at some point in the future. Nobody knows when it will be. Some optimists think it's within 5 years. Some pessimists think it's going to take 20. But it will be during your working lives and not at the tail end. That is not when generative artificial intelligence is pervasive, which is the large language model, but when an AGI, an artificial general intelligence, will emerge. The AGI will be able to think. And everything that we think we know will be thrown out the window about how we approach work, about what is good work product, about what makes sense. Because we, as humans, are not only great thinking machines if well trained, but we're also a bundle of biases and emotions that get in the way of good decision making. And a good artificial general intelligence won't have those. It will be able to outperform our ability to think, perhaps even to create, 9 times out of 10. But even an artificial general intelligence, at the end of the day, will have to make a choice. It will be given a task. It may even present the likely best outcome, the second outcome, and analyze the difference between the two. It may even be told and be able to choose between them. But even the AGI will have a model of discernment. And if you will be developing your ability to discern in your own ways, now, at the dawn of this era, and you keep practicing it more and more and more, you are going to have a fighting chance, not a guarantee, a fighting chance that in the age of AGI, you will be able to be the individuals that are managing the AGI as opposed to being displaced by it. Now, how can you do that? Outside of leveraging it, outside of taking your tasks, whatever they are, seriously as a learning opportunity, Forget the desire to get a certain grade. Forget the desire to pass a certain test. But use the opportunity to learn, to be able to discern nuance, to be able to understand what it is that a pointer versus a counterpoint is made, and how do you decide which is better. Developing those tools is going to be crucial. But I think even more importantly, in your day-to-day lives, test yourselves. One of the rules of thumb that I use on whether or not I myself am doing what I need to do to prepare this fossilized brain to be prepared for a different age, how Minerva students are prepared, is I call it the opinion column test. A person who is geared up for the world of nuance and discernment should be able to read 100 opinion columns from 100 different publications and disagree with 95 of them. If you're reading opinion column after opinion column from a certain political bent, from a certain perspective, and you're saying, absolutely, that's exactly right, you're in trouble. Because the reality is that most opinions are biased. They are incorrect. Most perspectives are simplistic. They're not nuanced. They're not layered. They don't think through cause and effect. And even when they do, they often get it wrong. And if you find yourself reading opinion columns of things that you principally agree with and saying, yes, what a great perspective, you're in trouble. Read them and think through, what did this author miss? What is a different perspective that in and of itself is also not true or not correct, but that has information that needs to be incorporated? How do I discern what elements of the argument make sense to carry forward, and how do I discern what elements from the counter-argument make sense, and how do I combine them in ways that are coherent? If you challenge yourself to be able to do that in subject after subject, topic after topic, educate yourselves using the resources that you have at your institution to be able to give you the fact basis, the knowledge basis to be able to engage and interrogate those areas, you are going to be vastly better positioned than students graduating in other institutions all over the world. And so, the AI paradigm is about how things will change. But whereas you do not know how they will change, you can prepare yourselves. And I want to give you one last scenario which is a very different kind of outcome than the painting I just painted. What I just presented to you, this idea of the 10x professional and increased quality of work and all the rest, whereas it is a dystopian view for some workers, in many ways it is a utopian view for society. We become ever more efficient as humans, we're able to produce more with less, quality goes up, everything looks better. And sure, we have to figure out our social systems and infrastructure and how we distribute wealth and how that works, and that's all good. And the question is, will you be participating and winning in those spoils? But let me give you a completely different perspective on the future. And for that, let's look at the past. In 1998, a company was founded you may have heard of called Google. Google was not the first search engine. There were other search engines that existed before Google, before any of you were born. Things like Alta Vista, and Ask Jeeves, it was actually a company named Ask Jeeves, and Excite, and Yahoo, which was a version of a search engine which kind of went away and became a different approach. But Google did do it better. And Google had a tagline, they had a promise that they would organize the world's information. Now, in 1998, when people were exposed to Google and they saw, wow, the promise of search, which really came into the public consciousness about 3 years earlier, was really there. And you could predict, boy, this is amazing. The machine is now able, using metadata, using links, using large data or machine learning, it really will be able to do the work that was previously reserved for editors. Right? Before, it was the editor that was going to decide what shows up and what doesn't. And so now we could see a utopian future. Sure, maybe we won't need as many editors, but Google will arrange the simple stuff, and the real value add will come from human editors who will have taste, discernment, that will be able to be the taste makers of the world, and they will be the ones leading society, and everything will get better. We will become more sophisticated consumers of information. It will be easier. We will be able to up-level things, and the quality of the information we consume is going to skyrocket. What has happened since Google to editorial content all over the world? The exact opposite. Google, because of its massive efficiency, its ease of use, its convenience, its ubiquitous presence, trained generations of humans to mediocrity. And what happened to human-led editorial content? Followed suit. Top 10 lists, listicles, what's buzzing, influencers, clickbait. These are the things that humans started to get rewarded for. The underlying market for editorial shifted. What had economic value in the past was swept out and was replaced by an economic value of mediocrity. Now, there are some high-quality editors that still exist. They do make a living. But the broad consumption of content is filtered for the masses. It is filtered for a low common denominator, not a high one. It doesn't produce the ability to propagate nuanced, thoughtful commentary, much like those opinion columns you should all be reading and you should all be disagreeing with. What does that mean now at the dawn of artificial intelligence created content? Not curated, created. Early on, if there is such a thing, after the founding of ChatGPT, in the massive rush to create new companies using that powerful technology, a new company was created about 8 months ago now and launched. called omniscience. And omniscience would be an AI prompt that would be able to be fed a bunch of proprietary information, and you would write a prompt, and in 8 minutes, it would produce a fully written and edited fiction or nonfiction book. 8 minutes. Now imagine that 99% of those books are garbage. But imagine that 1% are not. And imagine that 1% of that 1% is profound. And imagine further that 8 minutes to produce each book, doesn't take a lot of imagination, isn't done serially, it's done in parallel. And now imagine that this algorithm, this AI, gets better and better and better. But in the process, it floods the zone. Who's going to read these books? How do we know which one will catch on? How do we know which one becomes worthy of attention? Probably not based on its quality, but based on its likability. What happens when AI-generated art floods the zone? You have artists that look at various AI-generated or AI image-generating AI apps and say, oh my God, this is terrible, low quality, I would never use that. Yet the general public loves it. Shows up on memes, shows up on presentations, shows up in your college class PowerPoint, I'm sure. And you are being trained to think that it's good. No matter which future comes about, your ability to discern and navigate within it is what is going to be determinant on whether or not you're going to come out on the other side, contributing to society and being able to reap the rewards of that, or if you are going to be swept away by whatever current comes around. Your education, your time now is the most important time of your life in what is perhaps the biggest foundational change that we're going to face as humanities in your lifetime. And I hope that, if anything, that our conversation, or my version of explanation, which I hope will turn into a little bit of a conversation now, will inspire you to dig in and invest what is necessary in your time and energy in order to prepare yourselves. Because once you get out into the real world, you will see your time will shrink dramatically. So take advantage of me being here, of having these resources, and of being able to teach yourselves how to prepare for what may or may not be coming. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We want to take some time. We have a lot of time for questions. So hopefully you've been thinking. We're going to open it up. All right, who will go first? Just raise your hand and we'll bring the mic.
Thank you for your lecture. It was very inspiring. My name is Taeyong Han from Handong University, and I have two questions. The first one is, it was my understanding that you said not to use ChatGPT or like other AI tools in your college works or assignment because you're leveraging your ability to think, and that's important. But there are other perspectives that you have to be familiar with the AI tools because it is very important to work with AI. So I was curious, what is your take on that, and what is more important? And the second question is that you said the important thing is to know the nuance and discernment of things, and to think about the pros and cons and opinion. And I was thinking the reason you said this was important because you said that we have to discern what is good and what is bad from like the flooding AI results. So I was wondering if that's the why that's related. So thank you.
So very good questions and important to clarify. What I wanted to make sure you don't do is not use ChatGPT for your work. I wanted to say that you shouldn't use ChatGPT instead of your work. So you shouldn't write a prompt, have a generation, cursory skim, submit. That doesn't help you. You won't learn anything. And again, it's a way for you to ignore your work. What I was suggesting was instead, you become a hyper user of ChatGPT. Learn to prompt engineer in such a way that it generates 10 different essays with 10 different perspectives. Look at them, evaluate them, think about them deeply, figure out how to bring one aspect from another one and another aspect to another. Maybe iterate with ChatGPT to write more and more and more versions, and then do the final edit yourself, right? And so it's absolutely about using the tool, but it's using the tool to help you learn, to actually give you more data, more stimulation, rather than shortcut it. So that's the key. And that's where you're going to learn the nuance. That's where you're going to be able to see, here are 10 perfectly reasonable sounding, maybe 8 of them are perfectly reasonable sounding and 2 of them sound totally wacky, but 8 out of 10 perfectly reasonably sounding essays that ChatGPT has produced on the subject matter or the topic. Okay, that can't be right? You can't have 8 perspectives that are all correct. So let's figure out which one has a better point in what aspect. What aspect does one essay miss? How do I reconcile this point with that seemingly contradictory point? I wonder if ChatGPT can help me figure that out, right? I wonder if it can't, can I? Maybe they are contradictory and therefore I can't have it both ways. Now I have to choose, right? That is a process by which you actually learn, right? And that's what my broad thesis is in advocating for. But thank you, that was very important to clarify.
Thank you for such an interesting talk, Mr. Nisson. Well, just out of pure curiosity, since you've mentioned that you've hired and worked with some of the 10X engineers, I'm wondering if there's like a feature that they share in common where if there's something that lets you know when you see one, if it'd be so nice to like share it with us.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I will say it's kind of a trite answer. One thing they all share is an outrageously high IQ. They're brilliant. And they have vast clock speed capacity in their brain. They're also able to see and understand enormous complexity and logic, and are able to deploy it in effective ways. So those are some, unfortunately, you can train yourself to some extent in the old system, but a lot of it, you got to kind of bring it with you, and how you're born into it kind of helps. That is, in many ways, some of the promise of what these AI enhancement tools are going to be, because I think the ability to train yourself with that interaction, it really is able to dramatically increase what your IQ is. You don't have to be a genius to be able to evaluate things, right? And if you train yourself in the process of mass evaluation and then mass synthesis, right, you're actually should be able to produce work at that level. So, so that to me is the promise. I mean, I've never met somebody who trained themselves to be a 10x engineer. Just were.
Hello, sir. Thank you for the talk. It was very informative, and I found a lot interesting in it. You spoke about how 10x engineers were more unique before AI became so developed, and now with the advent of ChatGPT and large language models like that, we're more likely to have more 10x engineers and 10x lawyers and things like that. My question was based on how those fields are generally based a lot in data or numbers or efficiency and like physics, things like that for engineering, or precedents and bylines for law. But someone said to me yesterday how psychology they thought of as the one field of science that AI would be challenged at least or unable to overtake. The sense that it is there's a lot of empathy or feeling and things like that. Of course, very common thing when we speak about AI is this topic, but I was still wrestling with that myself and trying to figure out how that fits in when you spoke about AGI and how that will be able to think, but thinking is not necessarily feeling. So I wanted to know your take on that, if possible.
Yeah, this is one of my favorite traps, right? In the sense that, you know, a lot of the folks who said, oh, you know, before ChatGPT, they'll never be able to write that, you know, essay on Arendt and Proust. They immediately went to like, well, you know, there's, you know, it can't empathize, right? It's like, that'll always be the human domain. I don't know if any of you have ever visited with a psychologist. There is zero empathy in their practice. Zero, right? It's them sitting on a chair as you sit on a far lower chair or couch that makes you feel small, and then you say something, and then they say, how does that make you feel? And then they scribble something on their pad, and they say, well, what do you think about that? And they scribble something, etc. Guess what? There is a company that is using today ChatGPT to deliver that service, and it is wildly popular. Wildly, right? Because it's actually so easy to make the ChatGPT interface today feel very empathetic, right? Because what is empathy? How do you express empathy? It's a very simple formula. You mirror, right? And then you probe in a non-judgmental way. Mirror, probe, mirror, probe, mirror, probe. And that makes people feel so good. We're very simple machines. And hacking our biased minds is a much easier job for the machine than for humans. So I actually think that despite the broad sense that oh yeah, this is the purview of humans, I mean, there are already examples of companies that are using it to good effect. And it's, I wish I could remember the name of that app, but it's, I don't believe that is going to be the purview of that. I will say a slightly harder, actually in many ways vastly harder challenge, if I were to pick one, is breakthrough comedy, right? Derivative comedy is easy for ChatGPT, for a large language model, right? But what makes the best comedians, the breakthrough stars? They say shocking things that we have not heard before, right? Very hard to generate that from a large language model. So that's at least my little hypothesis. I'm probably wrong about that too, but who knows?
Thank you for your lecture. I was here because I was interested in the lecture's topic, but also I was really curious about Mineruva University. So my question is that you really taught us that discerning ability is really important in this century. So is there any special educational tool or like special things in your university that students are studying to develop their discerning abilities?
Yeah, absolutely. In many ways, what I try to provide you with is, I wouldn't say a shortcut to discernment because it's not short. It's a lot of work, but it trains you to discern via practice, right? It gives you the burden of going through enormous amounts of information and deploying those tools over and over and over again. At Minerva University, and hopefully at Handong in the future, the way to give you a turbocharge, a boost in that process, is to train you on the use and deployment of frameworks, right? Once you know how to use tools to discern, then you can learn how to discern much more easily. So for example, think about the quality of a source, right? What is a source quality? And by the way, source quality is kind of a fascinating topic because you would normally say, oh, well, you know, some rantings on a blog of much lower source quality than a reporter in the New York Times. Well, guess what? A lot of reporters in the New York Times are absolute morons. They have no idea what they're talking about and certainly don't know the field that they're covering, right? And now, it doesn't mean that all of them are. Some of them are very, very good, right? But even the good ones write very bad pieces. Even the bad ones write some good pieces. There are published, peer-reviewed research that is published that is absolutely and completely wrong. 50% of social science research cannot be replicated. Published social science research. And so you have to think of source quality as one field, but then you got to think about, okay, well, if I really want to know, let's look at the underlying data. What's the experimental design? Is there statistical significance? Is it correlation versus causation that they're referring to, right? What are the tools that you use to evaluate what is being given to you? And so a Minerva education exposes those tools, trains the students' minds to be able to deploy them, and makes the process of discernment easier.
Thank you, Mr. I was really motivated with your speech, and one of the most motivated was discerning myself and criticizing when reading columns, like for example. So my question is, how can I train myself by reading columns? Like for example, does reading book and summarize it myself can be helpful, or like other things? And the next question is, I also want to know what is your best recommending book in terms of training myself and prepare for Asia era? Thank you.
So good questions. The reason that I mentioned columns as opposed to books give you a lot more depth, obviously. But when you train yourself, you want a large sample size, a large N. And so the more that you can consume and evaluate, the better. Now, of course, in a book, you would consume many more things, but most books are only books because the author wants to get paid. There usually should be pamphlets that then get turned into books because nobody buys pamphlets and nobody publishes them. And so most books are really not worthy of the size, and therefore you would spend a lot of time going through really anecdotal examples of the same concept. And generally, because of that, you should be able to poke holes in them relatively quickly, but it'll take you a long time to get through them. So that's why I use short, fast editorial content to be able to train yourself on a more regular basis. Papers would be another perhaps quicker approach to it. As far as what book I would recommend, recently we lost one of the world's great minds, Danny Kahneman, Nobel Prize winner, and his last great book was called Thinking Fast and Slow. And Thinking Fast and Slow has become a bit of a prerequisite Minerva Bible for Minerva students, and so it's a great book, and it's worth understanding how it is that our brains function if you want to train your own.
Hello, thank you for your lecture, Professor. I'm a freshman in the school, and my question is, if we were to have children in the future, do you think that we should let them be exposed to this AI tools from when they're really little, or should we conceal these tools until they are mature enough to understand that there are cons and you should be careful while using them? Because when I was little, my parents actually didn't let me and my sisters use these digital machines or use phones, and we didn't even have a television at home. But nowadays, it's getting harder and harder, so I am curious about your opinion.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's a big question, and exposure is not binary. And it's not straight, again, like this is a point of a nuance. So in many ways, I'm going to give you an editorial and you can evaluate that editorial yourselves. There is significant evidence that social media is among the single most dangerous things to expose a pubescent or prepubescent female to. So if you look at suicide rates among children, historically, before the introduction of social media, again, this is in an American context, so you can just take that as a grain of salt, but that's where the data is from. Young boys committed suicide at twice the rate of young girls. With the advent of social media becoming ubiquitous for middle school age children, the suicide rate of boys slightly increased. The suicide rate for girls caught up fully, more than doubled. Now, that is correlation. It's not necessarily causation. But the underlying factors are almost impossible to ignore because there are causal elements to social media with bullying, self-image, etc., for which pubescent and prepubescent girls are primarily exposed to. So I have two daughters. One is 13, one is 8. They are not allowed to be on social media under any circumstance. I would not want to have the likelihood of my daughters killing themselves more than double. And yes, does that mean that they're not adept at certain tools or interactions? Are they a little bit less included in social circumstances? Yes, and that is a trade-off. But the data that we have suggests that that trade-off is worthwhile. Having said that, they have other ways of interacting. They can play social games like Minecraft. They can they engage in with YouTube videos and enjoying and having fun, etc. And so there are different ways and decisions and lines that you draw to expose students to tools based on the data and evidence that is presented to you. AI is an underpinning technology. It is not one that will be expressed in a singular way. And so there will be some ways in which you will not be able to shield your student or your children, nor will you want to. There will be other ways in which you will need to do that. The good news is that you will learn that as a parent, the minute a child is born, they are not like taking over the remote and clicking through channels. They're babies, they don't know anything. And so you can develop a personal growth journey for them that makes sense.
We want to thank you so much for sharing with us and taking the time to answer so many of our questions. I'm sorry we don't have time for more questions, but let's thank Mr. Nelson one more time.